I still remember the exact moment everything changed. Not the big dramatic moment, not the argument, not the phone call, not the night I sat in my car in the driveway for 40 minutes unable to walk into my own house. No, the moment that changed everything was much quieter than any of that. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of afternoon where the light comes through the windows in long golden stripes and everything smells faintly of the season changing. I was standing in my kitchen holding a mug of tea that had gone cold, and I was watching a video my daughter had posted on her Instagram. She was laughing, this big, open, unguarded laugh that I hadn't seen from her in years, and she was leaning into a woman I barely knew, a woman who had been in her life for less than 3 years, a woman who was not me. The caption said, "My rock, my safe place, my home." And I thought quietly in that terrible way that the worst realizations come, she's not talking about me. I set the mug down, I walked to the window. Outside, the maple in the front yard had gone completely orange, every leaf lit up like a small fire, and I stood there for a very long time, not crying, not angry, just standing there with this hollow, ringing feeling in my chest, trying to understand how we had gotten here. I want to tell you this story slowly because it didn't happen fast. The loss of my daughter didn't happen in one day or one fight or one decision. It happened the way water carves through stone, gradually, almost invisibly, one small moment at a time. And if I want you to understand it fully, I need to take you back to the beginning of things. Back to when she was small and the world between us felt as safe and solid as anything I have ever known. My name is Diane. I am 61 years old. I was born in a small town in central Ohio, the second of 4 daughters, the one my mother always called the quiet one, which was not entirely a compliment. I grew up in a house that was full of noise and love and complicated feelings, the way most houses are. My father worked at the paper mill. My mother cleaned houses 3 days a week and made the best apple butter in the county and sang hymns under her breath while she ironed, which is the sound I most associate with the word home. We were not wealthy. We were not unhappy. We were just ordinary, which is maybe the most underrated thing a childhood can be. I married my husband Daniel when I was 27. He was tall and serious, and he loved me with a steadiness that felt like the earth under my feet. I thought I had found the realest thing, and for a while I had. Our daughter Lily was born when I was 29, and I want to tell you, without any exaggeration, without any rose-colored glass, that the day she arrived in the world was the most clarifying experience of my life. Like someone had taken everything blurry and brought it sharp into focus. She was the point of everything. She was 8 pounds, 2 ounces, with dark hair that stood up in every direction, and she screamed so hard when they laid her on my chest that I started laughing and crying at the same time, and Daniel was beside me saying, "Look at her, Diane, look at her," and I looked and I never really stopped. I want to tell you about some of the small things, because it's always the small things. I want to tell you about the way Lily used to pad into our bedroom on Saturday mornings when she was 4 or 5, carrying her stuffed elephant. She called him Peanut. She still has him somewhere, I think, and she would wedge herself between Daniel and me and fall back asleep, one arm thrown over my neck. The weight of a small child sleeping against you is one of the most profound comforts I have ever known, like warmth made physical, like love given a body. I want to tell you about the way she used to sit at the kitchen counter while I made dinner, talking to me about nothing in particular, her friends, a book she was reading, something a teacher said that confused her, and how I always kept one ear tuned to her voice even when I was stirring something on the stove, even when I was half distracted, because I never wanted her to feel like she wasn't being heard. I could pick her voice out of any room. I still can. There is something that happens to a mother's hearing that I don't think ever fully reverses. I want to tell you about the winter mornings when she was 7, 8, 9, how I would braid her hair before school in the gray early light while the radio played quietly and the house smelled like coffee and toast. How she would hold perfectly still for the braid but then shake her head the minute I finished and say, "Too tight, Mama," and I would undo it and start again, laughing a little, and she would laugh too, and we would be 5 minutes late for school, and I didn't care, not even a little. Those 5 minutes felt like the most important 5 minutes of the day. I want to tell you about her at 10, reading under the covers with a flashlight long after bedtime, and how I would come in pretending to be strict and find her so absorbed in whatever world she was living in that she would startle when I put my hand on her shoulder, like she'd been pulled back from somewhere very far away. I would take the book from her gently, mark her page, tell her to sleep. She would always say, "Just one more chapter." I would always say no. I would always wait until her light was out and then stand in her doorway for a moment in the dark, listening to the quiet of her sleeping, before going back to my own room. I was not a perfect mother, I want to be clear about that. I had moments of impatience. I missed school events when work demanded it. I was not always as present as I intended. I had a temper that I inherited from my own mother and spent most of my adult life trying to manage with varying degrees of success. There were evenings when I was too tired to be kind, and I knew it, and I felt the small guilt of it in the morning. There were arguments, as she grew older, harder arguments, where I said things in a sharper way than the situation deserved, and then lay awake afterward cataloging my failures. I was a real person, with all the frailty that comes with that, but I loved that girl with every single thing I had, and for a long time I believe she felt it. I believe it was the ground she stood on. Daniel and I separated when Lily was 11. I am not going to spend a great deal of time on the reasons, because they are complicated and private, and honestly, they are not really the point of this story. What I will say is that it was not dramatic and it was not sudden. It was more like watching a slow lake, watching the warmth go out of a room over the course of years, until one morning you wake up and realize you are both cold and the fireplace is dark and you cannot remember the last time either of you tried to light it. We were not enemies. We were not even particularly angry. We were two people who had drifted so far apart from each other that the kindest thing left was to stop pretending the distance wasn't there. We told Lily together at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. She was sitting across from us with a glass of orange juice she didn't touch, and she listened very carefully, the way she always listened to hard things, with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes going very still. She asked 3 questions. Was it her fault? Where would she live? Would we both still be at her birthday? The answer to all 3 was no, no, and yes. We did our best to hold the shape of a family around her even after the marriage was gone. We lived 15 minutes apart. We kept the same school, the same friends, the same rhythms. I got her during the week. Daniel got her on weekends. It wasn't seamless, nothing like that ever is, but we tried. We really tried. And Lily was okay, more than okay, actually. She was a resilient child, the way some children are, not because nothing touches them, but because something inside them bends without breaking. She cried some nights. She had a phase at 12 where she became very quiet and very withdrawn in a way that worried me enough to take her to a therapist, a kind woman named Patricia who saw her for about 8 months and whom Lily adored. She asked questions in that therapy, hard ones, real ones, and she came home from those sessions slightly lighter each time, the way people do when they've been given language for something they were carrying without words. She got through it. We got through it. For 3 years after the separation, things were hard but manageable. Daniel and I co-parented with a kind of professional courtesy that slowly, over time, softened back into something like friendship. I worked full-time at the administrative office of a school district, not glamorous but steady, and I kept the house. And I packed Lily's lunches every morning, and I went to her cross-country meets in the rain, standing on the sideline in a wet jacket watching her run with that focused, private face she got when she was pushing hard. I drove her to sleepovers and picked her up at midnight and sat with her when she had a nightmare and told her she was safe. She was loved. Everything was going to be fine. And then Daniel met Rebecca. I want to be fair about this. I know I have a stake in how I tell this story, and I know that means I am not a neutral narrator, so let me try to be as honest as I can. Rebecca was 38 when she came into Daniel's life. She was a landscape architect. She had warm brown hair and an easy way of talking that I noticed the first time I met her at a school event of all places when Daniel introduced us, and she smiled and shook my hand and said, "Lily talks about you all the time. She's so proud of you, and I thought, she's good at this. She knows exactly what to say." And then I thought, but maybe she means it, and not knowing which was true bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I did not dislike her immediately. I want to be honest about that too. There was nothing obviously wrong with her. She was kind to Lily from the beginning, genuinely kind, not performatively. She didn't try to rush things or force affection. She let Lily come to her at her own pace, the way you would approach a shy animal, patient, easy, unthreatening. Lily would mention her occasionally, casually, the way she'd mention a teacher she liked or a neighbor she'd started talking to. Nothing alarming. Just she's around, she seems okay. They got married 2 years after they started dating. Lily was 15 by then, and she stood up in the wedding, not as a bridesmaid, just present, included. I heard about this secondhand. Daniel called to tell me the night before, which I suppose was courteous, though it didn't feel that way at the time. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed after that call, looking at the wall, thinking about the particular and peculiar loneliness of being officially peripheral to something that was once the center of your life. Things shifted after the wedding. Not all at once, I keep saying this, but it's important, it's the whole shape of the thing. Gradually, like the way a room gets darker as the afternoon goes on, so slowly you don't think to turn on a light until suddenly you realize you've been sitting in near darkness for an hour. Lily was 16. She was starting to move through that passage that teenagers move through, the one where they pull away from their parents and test the edges of themselves against the wider world. This is normal. This is supposed to happen. I knew it was happening and I told myself it was healthy, which it was mostly. She called less. She texted in shorter bursts. When she was with me, she was present in her body, but often somewhere else in her mind, which is just being a teenager. I tried not to take it personally. Some days I managed this better than others. But something felt different about the way she pulled away from me versus the way she still seemed to anchor at Daniel and Rebecca's house. I could hear it in her voice when she talked about their weekend trips, their Friday night dinners, the way Rebecca was redoing the garden and had asked Lily to help choose the plants. She was animated, she was engaged. She laughed easily when she talked about those weekends, the kind of laugh that has no self-consciousness in it, no performance. When she came home to me after those weekends, she was often quieter, often tired. I tried to read this correctly. I told myself she felt safe enough with me to be tired. Isn't that what the therapists say? That our children bring their hardest feelings home to the people they trust most. I told myself that. I held on to it. But it was the kind of thing you hold on to not because you fully believe it, but because the alternative is too heavy to carry, while you're also trying to make dinner and ask about homework and check in about her day. But there was a night, she was 16, maybe almost 17, when she came home from a weekend at her father's and she had this glow about her. The specific glow that comes from having been genuinely seen by someone. She was telling me about something Rebecca had said to her, some conversation they'd had about Lily feeling pressure about college, about the weight of other people's expectations, about learning to separate what she actually wanted from what she thought she was supposed to want. And I listened, and the conversation as she described it was lovely and wise, and exactly the kind of conversation I would have had with her, had she come to me with those fears. But she hadn't come to me, she had gone to Rebecca. I said nothing, I asked her questions. I kept my voice warm and my face open, and inside I was somewhere dark and quiet, turning something over and over in my hands, some hard object that I couldn't quite identify yet. Not anger, not jealousy exactly, something more like the feeling of realizing a door you thought was open has, very quietly, been mostly closed. Over the next year, I began to notice a pattern. It wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming fights, no slammed doors, no clear moment of rupture. It was more like a choosing, a series of small, quiet choosings that added up over time to a direction. When Lily needed advice about a boy she was seeing, she called Rebecca. When she needed help with her college essay, something I had been looking forward to, something I had thought would be one of those deep, late night at the kitchen table experiences we would have together, she worked on it with Rebecca, who had apparently also gone through a long college application process with her niece and had a lot of thoughts on the matter. I found out the essay was done when Lily mentioned submitting her applications. When Lily had a hard day and needed to hear a kind voice, she called Rebecca. I found this out not because Lily told me, but because she mentioned it in passing one evening, the way you mention things you don't realize carry weight. Rebecca helped me figure out what to say, she said, about something, I can't even remember what now, and she said it so casually, like of course, like this was the natural order of things, like water flowing downhill. I went quiet, she noticed, and she looked at me with something that was not quite guilt and not quite pity, something in between, something that scared me more than either one, something that looked a little like she had been expecting this moment for a while. Are you okay, Mom? I'm fine, I said. I'm really glad you had someone to talk to. And I meant it, I genuinely meant it. But I also went to bed that night and lay there for a very long time staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, that particular sound old houses make at night that used to comfort me and now just sounded like loneliness breathing. The year Lily turned 18 was the year I stopped pretending I didn't know what was happening. She graduated from high school that June, a bright, clear day, the whole auditorium smelling of floor wax and hairspray and that particular anxious energy of endings. I sat in the bleachers with my sister Carol, who had driven down from Columbus, and we watched Lily walk across the stage in her cap and gown, and I cried the way I cried at all significant moments in her life, not from sadness, not exactly, but from the magnitude of time. From the way it kept moving forward whether you were ready or not. From the fact that the little girl with the unruly dark hair who shook her head at a braid was now crossing a stage toward the rest of her life, and I had done most of what I was going to get to do. After the ceremony, there were pictures. This is where it started to crystallize for me, though I wouldn't have the word for it until later. The photographer, a friend of Daniel's, someone I didn't know, was arranging the family groupings, and I noticed the way Lily moved in the photos. When it was just the two of us, there was a slight stiffness to her, a careful arrangement of herself, a smile that was real but considered. When she stood with Daniel and Rebecca, she leaned. Her body just went toward them. Not dramatically, not with any obvious statement of preference, just leaned the way a plant leans toward light. I saw Daniel notice me noticing. He looked at me across the crowd with something in his eyes that might have been apology or might have been helplessness, and I looked away first. Lily left for college in August. She chose a school in Vermont, a small liberal arts college, 6 hours from here, and I helped her pack her room with the particular aching tenderness of a parent who knows she is packing away an era along with the sweaters and the shower caddy. I labeled boxes. I made a list of things she might forget. I cooked her favorite dinner the last night she was home, the pasta dish I'd been making since she was 9, and we ate it together with the windows open and the late summer night coming in warm and full of crickets. I put a card in her winter coat pocket, the way my own mother had done for me, with a note that said only, "You are deeply loved. You are ready for this. I'm so proud of you." She found the card and she hugged me and she cried a little and I cried, and for a moment we were just ourselves again, just Lily and her mother, the way we had always been. And I thought, we're okay, we're still okay. But the calls didn't come the way I expected them to. I understand that college is supposed to create distance. I understand that 18-year-olds are supposed to be learning to stand on their own. I am not talking about that. I am talking about the specific shape of the distance, the way she filled her need for connection not in the direction of me, but in the direction of a woman 6 hours away who was not her mother. She called Rebecca more than she called me. I know this because Lily told me in one of our conversations that she and Rebecca had started doing a weekly video call just to check in, she said, like it was nothing, and she mentioned it with the same casual ease she mentioned everything about Rebecca, which is to say without any awareness of how it landed, or maybe with awareness. Maybe it was said with the particular courage of someone who has decided it is time to stop managing. I want to be careful here because I know how this part of the story can sound. I know it can sound like I'm painting Rebecca as a villain, as someone who worked to steal my daughter's heart, and I want to be very clear, I do not believe that is what happened. Rebecca did not take Lily from me, she gave Lily something, and the thing she gave her, I had to reckon with this painfully over a very long time, was something I hadn't been giving her enough of, or maybe it was some thing I'd given her in one way but not in the way she needed, or maybe it was just chemistry, the inexplicable fact of two people who fit together in ways that have nothing to do with who deserves what. This is the hardest part to hold, the part that doesn't resolve into a clean lesson. I'm going to tell you about the conversation that broke me open. It was a March evening, late in Lily's freshman year. She was home for spring break, staying at Daniel and Rebecca's house most of the week, spending 2 nights with me. We went to dinner on her second evening, a restaurant we both liked, a small Italian place in town, red-checkered tablecloths, the kind of place that smells permanently of garlic and warm bread and has the same soft music playing that it's been playing for 20 years. We were doing fine, talking about her classes, her roommate, a professor she admired, and then somewhere in the middle of the second course, she looked at me differently. She looked at me the way people look at someone they've been rehearsing a conversation with. "Mom," she said, "can I say something?" My heart did a small, quiet thing. "Of course," I said. I feel like she stopped. She pressed her lips together. She is not someone who says things carelessly, never has been. I feel like when I talk to you about things, I always have to be careful, like I'm managing how you'll feel. And with Rebecca, she stopped again. I don't have to do that with Rebecca. The room kept going around us. A waiter walked by. Music played from somewhere, something Italian and instrumental. I sat very still. "Tell me what you mean," I said. My voice was steady. I am proud of this. My voice was steady. "Like when I was struggling last semester. With the workload and with what happened with Jalen, I wanted to call you. I thought about calling you, but I knew you would worry. I knew it would become about how worried you were, and I would end up taking care of you instead of talking through what I needed to talk through. And so I called Rebecca and she just listened. She just let me talk and asked questions and didn't make it about her feelings." A silence spread between us. I looked down at my plate. The food was very good and I had no appetite at all. I don't mean it as a criticism, she said, and her voice had gone soft in the way it went when she was afraid she'd hurt someone. I love you, Mom. I love you so much. I needed you to know why, because I think you felt it and I didn't want it to be this unspoken thing between us. I have felt it, I said. I know, she said. We sat there in the quiet of that for a moment. The candle on the table between us flickered. I'm sorry, I said finally, for the times I made my worry bigger than your need. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, she said. I know, I said, but I think I needed to hear it. I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was cold, 40 degrees, that sharp spring cold, because I needed the air. I needed to feel something physical and undeniable, the cold on my face, so that the feeling inside me had somewhere to go. I cried for about 10 minutes on the highway, then I stopped. I pulled into my driveway and I sat in the car in the dark for a while, the way I have come to do at the significant moments of my life, just sitting with what is true. What she had said was true. I knew it the moment she said it. The knowing felt like a key turning in a lock, not unlocking something new, but confirming something I had suspected about myself for years, that my love for Lily, fierce and genuine as it was, had always been threaded through with my own anxiety, that I had been present with her in all the ways I knew to be present, but that my presence had sometimes carried a weight she had to manage. That she had spent years, very quietly, very kindly, without ever making a scene, routing around me to get to the safe harbor she needed. And that harbor had been Rebecca, not because Rebecca was better than me, but because Rebecca was outside it all. Rebecca had no grief around Lily, no accumulated fear, no history, no weight of 12 years of loving someone so much it sometimes scared you. Rebecca could just be easy. I want to tell you what I did next, because this is where the story starts to turn. I didn't call Lily and tell her I forgave her because she had nothing to be forgiven for. I didn't call Daniel and make it complicated. I didn't post something cryptic anywhere, the way I might have done 10 years ago when I was still confusing pain with expression. I did something I had never really done before, which was sit with the truth of what I'd heard and let it be uncomfortable for as long as it needed to be uncomfortable, not fixing it, not explaining it away. Just letting it be real. I went back to therapy. A different therapist this time, a man named Dr. Whitfield, recommended by a colleague, with a quiet office full of plants and the kind of measured, attentive presence that made me feel like there was room to say the hard things out loud. I went every 2 weeks. I talked about Lily. I talked about my own mother and the ways I had inherited her worry along with her apple butter recipe. I talked about what it felt like to love someone so much that the love became a kind of pressure. I talked about how I had confused being there for someone with making everything about my reaction to what was happening to them. I talked about the grief of it, the real grief, not the sanitized version, the grief of having poured your whole self into someone and finding out that the shape of your love was not always the shape they needed. This was not easy, none of it was easy. But there is something, if you have never tried it, I would tell you, there is something about sitting in a quiet room and saying the hard, true things out loud to someone who is simply there to help you see clearly. It is slow and sometimes it hurts and sometimes you leave feeling worse before you feel better. But eventually, slowly, like the season changing, something begins to shift. I started making changes, small ones, practical ones. When Lily called, and she did still call, not as often as I wanted, but she called, I practiced something that Dr. Whitfield and I had talked about. I practiced listening without preparing my response. I practiced asking questions instead of offering reassurances. I practiced saying that sounds really hard instead of here's what I think you should do. I practiced sitting with the discomfort of not fixing things, of letting her experience be hers without immediately reaching in to manage it. These things sound simple. They are not simple when every instinct in you wants to fix and protect and manage the outcome. They take enormous effort, but I kept practicing. I also made peace with Rebecca. Not performed peace, not the gritted teeth politeness I had been offering for years at school events and holiday exchanges. Real peace. The kind that comes from genuinely understanding something and not just tolerating it. It took a long time to get there. It required me to be very honest with myself about the difference between what I felt and what was actually true. What I felt was that Rebecca had taken something from me. What was actually true was that she had offered my daughter something I was not, in that particular season of her life, able to provide. Those are very different things. I drove to Daniel's house one afternoon in October, almost exactly a year after that moment in my kitchen with the cold tea and the Instagram video, and I knocked on the door and Rebecca answered and I said, "Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to talk." We sat in her kitchen, which was warm and bright and smelled of something baking, herbs drying on the counter, sunlight on good wooden floors. She was careful at first, guarded, she had every reason to be, given that I had spent 3 years regarding her with barely concealed resentment. I told her I was not there to make anything difficult. I told her what I had been working through, not in great detail, but enough. I told her that I was grateful, and here my voice broke a little, which I had not planned on. I told her that I was grateful she had been there for Lily in the ways that Lily needed. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then she said something that has stayed with me. She said, "She loves you, Diane, she really loves you. The fact that she came to me doesn't mean she needed less of you. I think it means she needed more, and I was just available in a different way." I sat with that, I let it be what it was. "I want us to be able to be in the same room without it being tense," I said. "So do I," she said. We didn't hug, it wasn't that kind of moment, but we sat at her kitchen table and drank coffee and talked for almost 2 hours, and when I left I felt lighter than I had felt in years. Not because everything was resolved, it wasn't. Not because the loss of those years was undone, it wasn't. But because I had stopped fighting what was true, and that is such an enormous relief, the thing that happens when you finally stop fighting what is true. Lily came home for Thanksgiving that year. It was the first Thanksgiving we had all spent in the same town in years, and we did something we had never done before. We had Thanksgiving dinner together, all of us. Daniel and Rebecca and Lily and me and my sister Carol, who came down again from Columbus, and Rebecca's sister who was in from Chicago. We were 6 people around a table that was set very nicely, with white candles and a centerpiece that Rebecca had made from things out of her garden. Dried hydrangeas, rose hips, late berries, and the whole house smelled of roasting turkey and something sweet baking. And it was imperfect and slightly awkward at first, and then suddenly, over the second glass of wine and someone's funny story, it became something almost tea warm. Lily sat next to me. She put her hand on my arm at one point during dinner, just briefly, just a touch, while the conversation was going on around us, and I looked at her and she looked at me and we didn't say anything, but there was something in her face, a recognition, a softness that told me we were still there, that whatever had shifted between us was not permanent, was not the whole story, was not the end, that somewhere underneath all of it, the original thing was still intact. After dinner, she helped me with the dishes while the others were in the living room, and we talked for a long time, the way we used to, easily, unhurriedly, following the conversation wherever it wanted to go. She told me about a poetry class she was taking, which surprised me. She told me she had started running again, that she ran early in the mornings before anyone else was up, that she loved the way Vermont looked in the early light, the mountains, the cold air, the way the trees looked in winter, bare and legible against the sky. She told me she missed me sometimes at college in ways that were hard to explain, not homesick exactly, but aware of my absence the way you're aware of the weight of a coat when you take it off. I cried, of course, in the kitchen with my hands in the soapy water. I cried. She pretended not to notice, which was very kind. I want to tell you about my life now because it is different from what it was, and I think the difference matters. I have a garden that I have been tending for 2 years with a seriousness I have never applied to a garden before. I grow tomatoes and beans and zucchini in the summer, and I have a whole bed of perennials that I am slowly learning the names of: echinacea, rudbeckia, Russian sage, a particular lavender that blooms later than the others and is the last thing to hold color when autumn comes. I go outside in the early morning with my coffee and I walk around and look at things, which is something I never had time for when I was in the thick of it, when the urgency of everything else made quiet mornings feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. Now I understand that quiet mornings are not a luxury, they are a necessity. I have a friend named Helen who I met at a book group at the library 2 years ago, and she has become one of the closest friends of my adult life. We walk together on Saturday mornings, 3 miles, sometimes 4, through the neighborhood and into the park, and we talk about everything and nothing, and sometimes we don't talk at all, and it's just the sound of our feet on the pavement and the birds and the particular quality of weekend morning light on quiet streets. She has been through her own hard things. She doesn't require me to perform wellness. She just shows up, and so do I, and that is the whole of it, and it is enough. I have let myself become interested in things that are just mine. A watercolor class that I take on Thursday evenings at the community center. Nothing serious, nothing ambitious, just paint and water and the slow surprise of color blooming on wet paper. The bread I have been learning to bake since last winter's sourdough. which is humbling and time-consuming and endlessly forgiving in ways that feel meaningful to me right now. Long novels that I read slowly in the evenings with a lamp on and the television off. Music I have started listening to again, albums I loved when I was young, that I stopped making time for somewhere in the middle of everything else. I have stopped filling every available silence with worry. This last thing has taken longer than anything else. Longer than the therapy, longer than the garden, longer than making peace with Rebecca. The worry, the particular anxious love that shaped me and that shaped my parenting, it was the last thing to loosen its grip. But it has loosened, not disappeared. I don't think it will ever fully disappear because it was born from love, and love doesn't just stop. But it has loosened enough that I can feel the difference in my daily life. There is a quality of ease in my mornings now that I don't think I had since before Lily was born, since before I became someone's mother and took on all the weight and beauty and terror of that. I talk to Lily every Sunday, usually in the late afternoon when she's back from her run and I'm back from my walk with Helen. We talk for an hour, sometimes two. We talk about what we're reading. We talk about the garden and about her classes and about the boy she is seeing now, Owen, who is kind and a little serious, which I think suits her. We talk about her grandmother sometimes, my mother, who died 2 years ago, and about what we miss about her, and about the particular way grief works, how it doesn't diminish exactly, but changes shape over time, becomes something you carry differently. We talk about things that matter. We talk about things that don't. Both feel equally good. Sometimes Lily tells me things she's working through, real things, hard things, and I listen. I ask questions. I try very hard not to make it about my worry, and sometimes I succeed cleanly. And sometimes I feel the old pull and I hold it back, and sometimes she gently says, "I'm okay, Mom, I'm okay," which is a reminder I still need sometimes and which I am learning to receive without shame. And sometimes she calls me just to hear my voice. Last spring she came home for a weekend visit, just a weekend, nothing special. She arrived on a Friday evening, pulled her car into the driveway, walked into the house with her bag over her shoulder and looked around at the kitchen, which I have rearranged, which has a new plant on the windowsill and the sourdough starter living in its jar on the counter and watercolors drying on the table, and she smiled. "I love what you've done in here," she said. "Thank you," I said, "it's mine." She looked at me then, and I saw her see something, some change in me that she recognized, that she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. Some loosening, some arrival. We made dinner together that night, pasta, nothing fancy. She told me about a poem she'd read in class that had stayed with her, 2 lines about the way grief and love are sometimes indistinguishable from each other, and I listened and I thought, there she is, there's my daughter. Before she left on Sunday, we sat on the porch in the early light with our coffee. The yard was coming into bloom, the lilac bush my mother gave me, the tulips I had planted in October, a dogwood that had surprised me by leafing out earlier than expected. We sat in the quiet and watched a cardinal move through the yard, that specific red that looks almost impossible in early morning light, and she said, not looking at me, looking at the bird, "I'm glad you're okay, Mom, I'm really glad." "I'm glad I'm okay too," I said. And then we sat in silence for a while, which was easy and light and perfectly comfortable, the way silence is between people who have found their way back to each other. This is what I want to tell you, if you're somewhere in the middle of something like what I have been through, if you are sitting in a car in a driveway in the dark, trying to understand how you got here, if you are watching a video of your child leaning into someone else and feeling the bottom drop out of something you thought was solid. Love is not enough by itself, and I do not mean that in the bleak way it can sound. I mean it in the truest way I know how to say it. Love is the essential thing, the thing without which none of the rest matters. But love alone, without the willingness to look clearly at how you love, without the courage to ask what your love looks like from the outside, love alone can close the very door it means to open. My daughter did not leave me because she stopped loving me. She did not choose Rebecca over me because Rebecca was more lovable, or more deserving, or because I had failed in some fundamental way. She chose Rebecca's presence in those years because Rebecca's presence did not come with the particular weight of being her mother, because Rebecca's love was less loaded. And the thing I had to learn, the hard, long lesson that took therapy and grief and a garden and a lot of early mornings and a friend named Helen and watercolors drying on the kitchen table, the thing I had to learn was that I could not compete with that. I could not try to become lighter, easier, less weighted by history and love and fear. I could only become more honest, more conscious, more willing to let Lily's experience be hers and to give her space to bring it to me when she was ready, rather than meeting her with my reaction before she had even finished speaking. And when I learned that slowly, imperfectly, the way all real learning happens, the door began to open again. Not all the way, I want to be honest about this too. Things between Lily and me are good now, genuinely good, but they are not what I dreamed they would be when she was small and sleeping across my neck on Saturday mornings. They are something different, something earned maybe, something that we built back up together out of honesty and willingness and time. And I think in some ways that makes it more real than the easy warmth of early childhood could ever have been, because we chose it. We chose each other again with clear eyes. She's 22 now, she's in her last year of college. She's going to graduate in May, and she has asked me to come, and I will be there, and I will be there without the particular grief that shadowed the last graduation, because something in me has changed, because I am not standing in the shadow of a fear anymore. I am standing in my own light, which is quieter than I once thought light would be, but warmer, more steady, more mine. I am a woman of 61 who tends a garden and bakes bread, and takes a watercolor class on Thursday evenings and walks with he. Our friend Helen on Saturday mornings and talks to her daughter every Sunday afternoon in the late golden light. I am not the story I thought I was going to be, but I think I am a truer story than the one I was living when I was fighting so hard to hold what I loved that I couldn't feel it anymore. The maple in my front yard has gone orange again. It does it every year. I don't know why I'm still surprised by it, but I am. Every October, without fail, like a small miracle that doesn't require my belief in order to happen. Like love, maybe. Like the things that persist in us even when we're not paying attention. I went outside this morning and stood under it for a while, the light coming through the leaves in every shade of amber and gold, and I thought about Lily, and I thought about Rebecca, and I thought about all of it. The loss and the finding, the long, difficult way back to something real. The years of sitting in cars and driveways and lying awake on ceilings and driving with cold windows on dark highways. And I felt, standing there under that tree, something I have not always been able to feel. Grateful. Just simply quietly, without reservation, grateful. For all of it, for the love that drove me half mad with worry, for the daughter who was honest enough to tell me the truth, for the woman who loved her in the ways I couldn't, for the time I've had to become someone my daughter can lean into, for Sunday afternoons and bread rising in a bowl on the counter and watercolors drying on the kitchen table and the cardinal in the yard and the orange maple and the light. And for you, for whoever is listening to this right now, maybe in the dark, maybe in a car in a driveway, maybe sitting with something heavy that you haven't yet found the words for. I want you to know you are not at the end of the story. What feels like loss is sometimes, if you let it, the beginning of something you couldn't have imagined from where you were standing. Keep going, the light is still there. It's just coming in from a different direction. If any part of this story felt like yours, I hope you'll stay with it for a while. Think about it. Let it sit with you the way real things do. And if you have something to share, your own quiet story, your own difficult truth, the comment section is there. It's a real place, and I read every single one, and you won't be alone there. If this story gave you something today, please share it with someone who might need it. That's how these stories do their work, one person at a time in the quiet. And if you'd like to hear more, please subscribe. I'll be here. Thank you for listening, and take care of yourselves. I mean it.